The wind cut sharp across the open plain, dragging lines of dust over the ground until it seemed the earth itself wanted to erase her. She stumbled forward, each step dragging against the weight of her body. Her back burned, torn raw from the lashes she had endured. The fabric of her dress clung to the wounds, stiff with dried blood and sweat, so that every movement felt like another punishment. Her face was pale beneath the grime, but her eyes stayed open, unblinking, as if to close them would mean surrender. The town had turned away, the people silent as stone when the last strike fell. She carried their silence now heavier than the welts across her spine. The road stretched like a scar between barren fields. No sound but the hiss of wind and the quiet groan of her own breath. She pressed her hand to her ribs, where each inhale struck like a hammer. The land around her was dry, the color of bone, endless and unfeeling. She thought of the children she had never borne, the empty cradle, the whispers that followed her to the well. Barren, they had called her, as though her womb defined the worth of her soul. Each lash had spoken that word again, a chorus of cruelty that etched itself into her flesh. She tried to straighten her shoulders, but her body folded instead, bent beneath memory and pain. A hawk wheeled above, circling as though it had been waiting for her. She almost laughed, the sound breaking in her throat like glass. Perhaps this was the end, the place where even the earth denied her. But then, faint and distant, she heard hooves. Not the thunder of an army, but the steady rhythm of one rider. She froze, unsure if it was mercy or one last humiliation. The rider came closer, the figure broad in the saddle, the shadow stretching long across the dirt. A cowboy, his frame heavy with the dust of the trail, slowed his horse when he saw her. His hat dipped low, his coat patched and worn. At his side, a rifle rested in a scabbard, not raised, not threatening, only present, like the man himself. He dismounted without words, boots crunching against the earth. She did not lift her head, afraid to see pity in his eyes. Instead, she stared at the ground until his shadow covered her. His voice came quiet, like water poured gently into a cup too fragile to hold. "You cannot walk much farther like this." She felt his hand, rough with calluses, hover near her arm, waiting, not forcing, not claiming. Waiting. The patience unsettled her more than any cruelty could. Her lips trembled, but no answer came. He did not press. Instead, he turned and whistled low, and in the distance came the sound of smaller hooves, lighter, quicker. Children's laughter rose with the sound, thin and bright against the hard plain. She lifted her eyes. Behind him, 5 children rode on 2 smaller horses, their faces sun-warmed and dust-streaked. They did not flinch at the sight of her wounds, did not turn away. The youngest reached out a hand as though she were not broken at all. The sight pierced her deeper than the whip ever had. Something in her chest cracked, but it was not despair this time, it was the faintest echo of warmth. She wanted to recoil, to protect what little remained of her pride, but her knees betrayed her. She sank into the dirt, trembling, the world tilting as if it might swallow her whole. The cowboy bent down, steadying her with arms that were strong but unhurried. She had been dragged, beaten, and abandoned, but never held with such careful strength. The sun slid lower, bleeding orange across the horizon. His children waited quietly, their horses shifting but not restless. He knelt so that his eyes met hers, steady and unblinking, like the earth itself had chosen to speak. She wanted to ask why. Why stop for her? A woman branded useless, cast aside. But her voice would not rise, and perhaps he already knew the question. His reply came simple, as though it needed no explanation. "You are not alone anymore." The words felt too large, too impossible, yet they settled into her as if they belonged. She closed her eyes then, and for the first time in years, let herself lean into another's strength. He lifted her as if lifting a wounded bird, careful of the torn places he could not see beneath the cloth. The horse shifted and breathed, warm and patient, while he made a sling of his coat and settled her sideways in the saddle to spare her back. She braced for the sting, and the spark of pain still came, but it did not own the whole sky anymore. His palm on her forearm steadied the trembling. He walked beside the horse rather than mount behind her, letting his boots take the dust and his shoulder take the strain of the lead. The children fanned around them like a small guard, solemn now, whispering to the horses, their eyes sliding toward her and back again, curious but gentle in a way the town had never been. The wind cooled as evening lowered. She watched the line of his hat brim cut the light. There was nothing hurried in him. He moved like a man who had known long distances and longer grief, someone who did not bargain with the land so much as listen to it. When a gust lifted a corner of her dress and the fabric stuck to the healing ridges at her spine, he glanced up without asking, slipped a folded bandana between cloth and skin, and did not look again. No word about shame or modesty, only the quiet knowledge of pain and what to do with it. Memory came in splinters. She saw a cradle that had never been filled, the curve of unfinished wood catching afternoon Sunday. She saw the women at the well, their heads bent together like crows on a fence line, saying the word barren, as if it were a stain that no water could wash. She felt the first lash land, not as punishment, but as proof the town needed, and the count grew until numbers lost meaning. She remembered the way the ground smelled when she fell, like iron and dust. She had told herself then that the earth would take her and that would be mercy. Now the earth took her weight through a saddle and a stranger's patience, and she did not know where to set her thoughts. They reached the low rise of a homestead as the light thinned to a pale blue. The house was not large, but stood with the assurance of something built by hands that returned each day to the same place. A line of laundry moved like ghosts of ordinary life. Beyond the house, a corral held a few cattle and a mule with the stubborn dignity of a priest. In the yard sat a wooden table scarred by years of plates and elbows. The children slid from their horses and ran ahead, not wild, only quick, like colts that had learned the edges of a fence. He helped her down. Her legs nearly refused the ground. He did not carry her across the threshold. He let her test her own strength and offered it when hers faltered. Inside, the house breathed with warmth. Bread left a faint sweetness in the air. An iron pot hung over banked coals. A kettle sang under its breath. He guided her to a chair near the stove, where heat could take the chill from her bones without touching the open places on her back. The youngest child appeared with a tin cup, eyes shining as though entrusted with a sacred task. Water at first, then broth, each offered like a question she could answer by lifting her hand. She did. He spoke little, but when he did, the words landed like posts set straight. He told her his name, and that the land had belonged to his father and his father before, men who died as honest as the dirt they turned. He said his wife lay under a hill of cottonwood leaves by the creek, and autumn still smelled like her hair. His voice edged softer on that sentence, not with weakness, but with the depth of a thing carried a long time. The children's faces shifted, arranged by the gravity of the words, then eased again when he looked at them. They had learned the shape of their father's grief and did not fear it, the way a ranch learns the look of a storm and keeps working. Night took the windows. He warmed a basin and brought a clean sheet, cutting it into strips with careful hands. He showed her the knife first, then set it down, the blade turned away. When she nodded, he moved behind her. He did not peel the fabric from the wounds. He wet it until it let go on its own. Each time the old cloth fell free, he pressed the new strips in place. She bit her lip, tasted copper, and breathed as he breathed, slow. A rope paid out to calm a skittish horse. When her breath stuttered, he paused and let silence hold them, a shelter no church had ever offered her. After, he stepped back. The children had fallen asleep where they leaned, scattered like fallen leaves across the rug and bench, the littlest curled with a wooden horse in her fist. He lifted them one by one to their pallets. He returned with a folded quilt and set it around her shoulders, light as a cloud that had decided for once to rest upon the ground. She watched his hands. They were not small or delicate. They were cracked and strong, made for rope and reins and fence wire, but they had learned how to be gentle without becoming uncertain. Work comes early, he said, not as a demand, but as a way of telling her what tomorrow might look like, if she chose to see it. We mend fence, feed the herd, fetch water from the creek. You can sit, or you can stand with us. He looked at her then, so she could see that both choices would be honored. In the dark glass of the window, she caught her reflection, a pale oval, eyes too bright, a mouth set by years of holding back words. She did not know how to belong to anything, but she knew how to wake up and move her hands. "I can stand," she said, the sound small as a seed. He nodded once, like a man agrees with weather. "Then we will start with dawn." She closed her eyes and felt the stove's warmth reach her slowly, like water finding the deepest roots. A quilt's edge brushed her throat. The house settled into the night and did not spit her out. She listened to the soft breaths of sleeping children, the creak of timber, the faint murmur of cattle beyond the walls, and for the first time since the lashes, her body did not brace for the next strike. The world, indifferent and vast, had not changed, but it had made a brief clearing, and in it stood a table, a stove, 5 small heartbeats, and a man who believed that endurance could be shared. Morning cracked with a pale band of light spreading across the horizon, washing the land in soft silver before the sun could burn it gold. The rooster crowed, the mule brayed from the corral, and the cattle shifted with the restless sound of lowing. She woke to the creak of the door and the smell of coffee, sharp and dark. Her body still carried the sting of lashes, but the pain no longer defined the whole of her. The quilt lay heavy on her shoulders, smelling faintly of cedar. She sat slowly, each movement deliberate, testing her strength. Her eyes found him near the stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup, his shoulders filling the frame of the room. He glanced toward her and gave a nod that seemed to carry both welcome and respect. The children shuffled awake, hair tousled, faces scrubbed by sleep. They moved with the rhythm of habit, gathering bowls, pulling on boots, tying laces with fingers still clumsy from dreams. No one stared at her wounds, no one whispered. They simply made space for her, setting an extra cup without asking. She lifted it with trembling hands, the steam curling into her face, and for the first time in years she felt the act of being included. It was not a gift wrapped in pity. It was a place at a table. The warmth of the drink slid into her, steadying the hollow places. After breakfast, the day opened wide. The sky spread without end, blue so fierce it felt like it could strip her bare again. He handed her a hat, the brim broad enough to shield her from the glare. "Sunday will break you quicker than the whip," he said, voice low. She tightened the string beneath her chin, and the words sat in her chest, not as warning but as care. He led her to the corral where the cattle waited, restless and snorting, their eyes dark with the knowledge of heat and work. The children scattered to their chores, filling troughs, hauling buckets, gathering eggs, and the yard hummed with the music of ordinary survival. He showed her how to mend a break in the fence, his hands steady on the wire. He did not take the work from her. He placed the tools in her grasp and let her learn the tension, the snap, the way steel sang when pulled tight. The task bit her palms, but it bit his too, and she found herself matching his rhythm. The sun rose higher, and sweat traced the lines of her spine, but she did not falter. Her body, marked by pain, found new ways to move. The wind tugged at her hair, and for a moment she felt almost part of the land, scarred but enduring, raw yet unyielding. When she stumbled, one of the children appeared at her side with a bucket of water. She drank, the cold spilling over her chin, and the child grinned as though she had won some unspoken trial. She smiled back, the expression foreign on her face, pulling at muscles long unused. The sound of laughter rose in the yard, not cruel, not biting, but light, filling the air with something she had once thought lost. She carried that sound with her, the way a traveler carries fire through the dark. Later, while the children chased one another across the field, he stood beside her at the fence line, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the land stretched forever, hard and unbroken. "This place takes," he said quietly, "takes more than it gives most days, but if you stand long enough, if you give back with both hands, it will root you." His words carried the weight of years, of loss etched deep but worn with grace. She did not answer, but she felt the truth settle in her bones like a seed. The evening fell soft, with shadows stretching long across the yard. The cattle quieted, the corral creaked, and the sky bled into crimson before fading into violet. Around the table again, the children spoke in bursts, recounting the day's small triumphs. She listened, her hands folded in her lap, and every so often one of them would touch her arm as though she had always been there. She found herself speaking too, a single sentence here, a fragment there, and the children leaned closer as though her words were rare stones worth holding. When night came, he sat by the stove, mending a bridle, the firelight drawing lines across his face. She watched him, the steadiness of his hands, the quiet strength that did not need to declare itself. Her heart beat unsteadily, like a horse not yet trained, caught between fear and longing. She turned her face toward the dark window where her reflection hovered, pale and thin, but no longer only marked by pain. She saw the faint trace of a woman learning to stand again. The house held its silence gently, the children breathing slow in their sleep. Outside, coyotes sang far off, their voices twining with the night wind. She lay on her pallet, the quilt pulled close, and felt the ache of her wounds soften beneath the greater ache of something stirring within her, a fragile, impossible hope. She closed her eyes, and instead of bracing for the whip, she let herself imagine the sound of hooves carrying her not to exile but to belonging. Dawn found her already awake, lying still while the house stirred around her. The ache of her back remained, but beneath it pulsed something steadier, quieter, like the hum of roots beneath soil. She rose carefully, folded the quilt that had held her through the night, and stepped outside. The air carried a sharp chill, smelling of dew and horses. The horizon burned faint with roselight, and she watched the sun climb as though it might measure her resolve. For years she had lived with the weight of others' judgment pressing her down. Now the land itself seemed to wait for her to decide what shape she would take. He stood near the corral, hat tipped back, hands busy with a length of rope. When he noticed her, he didn't greet her with surprise. His eyes only softened in acknowledgement, as though her presence was not an intrusion but part of the day's natural order. He nodded once toward the bucket at the well. Without speaking, she moved to it, hauled water, and felt her muscles complain yet obey. The handle bit into her palm, but the act itself was a declaration. She was not broken. Not here. The children came tumbling out, their laughter snapping the quiet wide open. They swarmed her with the reckless joy of youth, and one pressed a handful of wildflowers into her hand, the petals trembling with the same uncertainty she carried in her chest. She tucked them into her apron, and though she did not smile openly, something in her eyes softened, enough that the children lingered near her instead of running off. Through the day she worked at small tasks, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, fetching water. Her movements were clumsy at first, slowed by wounds, but no one mocked her. The youngest trailed behind, mimicking her, offering commentary in a high, steady voice that made her laugh without meaning to. The sound startled her. It had been so long since laughter had lived in her throat. She pressed her hand to her mouth, as though to hold it there, to keep it from escaping back into silence. By midday, sweat traced her temples. He passed her in the yard, carrying a sack of grain. Their eyes met, and for the briefest moment she saw not only patience but recognition, a man who knew pain, who had walked with loss as a companion. He did not speak of it. He did not need to. The silence between them was not emptiness, but a kind of agreement, like two travelers on the same trail sharing water without words. Later, when the chores eased and the sun tilted toward evening, he asked her to walk with him to the creek. The children chased each other through the tall grass behind them, laughter scattering like birds. The path wound between cottonwoods, their leaves whispering with the secret voices of the land. At the bank he paused, gazing at the water where it slipped silver over stones. "I bring the herd here in summer," he said. His tone was simple, factual, but beneath it lay something more, an offering of place, of belonging. She bent to touch the water, cool against her raw hands, and for a moment she imagined washing away all the names they had called her, all the wounds etched into her back. The creek accepted her touch without question, flowing on as though it had always known her. As the sun dipped lower, painting the world in amber, they returned. The children ran ahead, leaving the two of them behind. For the first time since she had come, he asked a question that reached past the surface. "Do you believe the past still owns you?" His voice was quiet, yet it cut sharp, like a blade slid clean through cloth. She stopped walking. The question struck at the core of her, at the lashes, the whispers, the emptiness of an unlived motherhood. Her throat tightened. For a long while she said nothing. the silence between them filled only by the rhythm of the creek still echoing in her ears. Finally, she whispered, "It feels carved into me. Like it will not let go." He studied her face, then looked toward the horizon where the sky bruised purple. "Scars stay," he said, "but they don't rule. They remind." His hand brushed the brim of his hat, a gesture more for her than for himself. "You've stood through worse than most could bear. That is not emptiness. That is strength." She let the words settle inside, unsure if she believed them, but needing to hear them said aloud. When they reached the house again, the children were waiting at the table with bread and butter, faces glowing in the lamplight. She sat among them, and though her back still throbbed with every breath, she felt a place forming where once there had been only exile. That night, as the fire dimmed and the house sank into quiet, she lay awake, listening to the steady breaths of sleeping children, to the soft creak of timbers, to the silence that was no longer loneliness but shelter. She touched the wildflowers beside her pillow, petals still fragrant though bruised, and whispered to herself the one word she had not dared in years: hope. The next days unfolded like slow stitches mending torn cloth. She rose with the children, not because anyone asked, but because the rhythm called to her. Her body resisted, the lashes across her back raw reminders of cruelty, yet each step into the yard was defiance against the memory of the whip. She carried buckets from the well, gathered eggs warm from the hens, and learned the weight of a pitchfork in her hands. The children orbited her, sometimes helping, sometimes distracting, but always weaving her into their circle. Their laughter softened her edges, their small hands reaching without fear. The world had named her barren, empty, unworthy, yet here she was surrounded by life that trusted her touch. He worked close by, steady and silent, teaching not through lectures, but through presence. When a fence post leaned, he showed her how to brace it with stone at its base. When a calf strayed, he taught her the low whistle that called it back. His patience was not indulgence, it was respect, as though he believed she was capable of carrying weight alongside him. That belief unsettled her more than disdain ever had. At night, her body ached with a new kind of pain, not from lashes, but from labor. Yet when she lay beneath the quilt, listening to the breathing of children, she felt herself belonging to the rhythm of survival. One evening, clouds gathered heavy over the horizon, bruised with thunder. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain. The children rushed to bring in laundry, their small feet kicking dust, while he secured the horses. She joined without hesitation, her movements clumsy but determined. Lightning split the sky, and rain hammered down, soaking them all in an instant. She stumbled in the mud, her wounds flaring, but his hand caught her elbow before she fell. They stood together in the storm, rain streaking their faces, the children shrieking with wild delight. For a moment, she felt the water wash more than dirt from her skin. It washed the weight of exile, leaving only the rawness of survival and the sharp sweetness of being alive. When the storm broke and the land smelled of earth reborn, they gathered by lamplight around the table. Bread steamed, the children's cheeks flushed with laughter, and the room glowed with warmth. She glanced at him across the table and saw not a savior but a man marked by his own losses, standing steady in the face of them. His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, neither looked away. In that silence, something passed between them, not a promise, not yet, but the shape of one forming. She lowered her gaze, heat rising in her chest, and felt the fragile beginnings of trust unfurling. But beyond the walls of that house, the world still waited. The town had cast her out, and the whispers of her barrenness still clung like smoke. She knew the day would come when judgment reached this quiet place, when voices of scorn would test what they had begun to build. As she lay that night, the rain dripping from the eaves, she touched the scars along her back and felt the tremor of fear return. Yet she also remembered the steadiness of his hand in the storm, the laughter of children filling the house, and the quiet conviction in his eyes. For the first time, fear and hope lived together in her, warring but balanced. She closed her eyes and chose, if only for this night, to believe in the strength of what had begun. The morning sun spread gold across the plains, softening the scars of the storm. Steam rose from the wet earth, carrying the smell of grass and clay. She stepped outside, the damp boards cool under her bare feet, and let the air touch her face. For a moment, she forgot the lashes, forgot the whispers, and simply breathed. The children were already busy, chasing one another through puddles, their laughter ringing bright. He stood by the corral, hammer in hand, driving nails into a post loosened by wind. His movements were sure, measured, a man accustomed to work that asked for more than it gave. She walked toward him, her steps uncertain, yet deliberate. He paused, setting down the hammer, and offered her a length of rope. "Tie this," he said, not as command but as invitation. She fumbled at first, her fingers stiff, but he waited without a word, until the knot held. His eyes caught hers steady, unhurried, and she felt something inside her steady in response. He did not praise, he did not instruct further. He simply trusted her to keep learning. That trust lit a flame she thought had long gone cold. Through the day she moved with the family's rhythm. She carried water, patched cloth, hushed a crying child with arms that had never known their own. The children leaned into her touch as though they had always belonged to her. Each gesture unraveled the verdict that had once chained her, that she was barren, that she had no worth. Here, in the ordinary mess of survival, she discovered a kind of motherhood that did not require blood but only presence. When the youngest pressed a sticky hand into hers and would not let go, she felt her chest ache with something fierce and new. As evening drew near, neighbors arrived. Word had spread of her presence. They came with cautious eyes, voices sharpened by rumor. Whispers coiled in the air like snakes. The barren widow, the lashed woman, the outcast. She stiffened, shame burning through her like fresh fire. Old habits urged her to bow her head, to shrink. But before she could, he stepped forward, shoulders squared, his children clustered at his side. "She stands with me," he said, voice low but carrying weight. No flourish, no anger, just a truth laid bare. The room quieted, the whispers faltered. His pride in her steadied her legs, rooted her where once she would have fled. When the neighbors left, silence lingered. She turned to him, her throat tight. Why risk their judgment? Her voice cracked under the question. He studied her a long moment, then spoke with the gravity of a man who had carried grief into dawn and still chosen to rise. "Because their judgment has no weight here. What matters is what we build." The words sank deep, anchoring themselves in places that had long floated untethered. That night she sat alone by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the plains. The scars on her back still throbbed, but they no longer told the whole story. The sound of children sleeping filled the house, and his steady presence lingered even in silence. She pressed her hand to the glass, cool and solid, and let herself believe just for that breath that her life could grow roots here. The past still whispered, but the future had begun to answer. The days that followed pressed her deeper into the marrow of the homestead. Each dawn rose with work waiting cattle to be driven toward pasture, grain to be spread, soil to be turned. Her body, still lined with scars, bent to the rhythm. The ache never left, but it no longer meant defeat. It meant life insisting she keep moving. The children walked beside her, their chatter bright as creek water. They trusted her with small tasks at first, a pail of feed, a hand guiding a lamb, and each time she proved steady, they gave her more. Trust, she learned, was not demanded but built, like fence posts set one after another until they formed a boundary strong enough to hold. He worked near her, always within reach, though never looming. When she faltered with a tool, his hand showed the motion, then pulled back, leaving the effort to her. She found herself watching him when he did not know how his shoulders carried the weight of labor without bitterness, how his voice softened when speaking to the children, how his eyes searched the horizon with both vigilance and longing. The land had carved him hard, yet inside lay something unbroken. In quiet moments, she wondered if he could see the same in her. One evening, the family gathered by the fire as the wind howled outside. The children begged for stories, and he began, his voice low, carrying the cadence of the trail. He spoke of buffalo hunts, of rivers crossed, of winters endured with little but hope and grit. When his words slowed, the children turned to her. Their eyes asked without speaking. She hesitated, the weight of silence pressing her chest, then opened her mouth. A story came halting at first. then flowing of a girl who once believed she was invisible, who found herself standing even when no one watched. The children leaned close, listening as though the tale were gold. When she finished, their applause was not loud, just the soft clap of small hands, but it struck her deeper than any sermon or song she had known. Yet beyond the warmth of firelight, shadows gathered. The town did not forget. Riders passed sometimes along the ridge, their eyes fixed on the homestead, their silence sharper than words. At the well, she heard the rumors carried by travelers, questions of why he had taken in a woman cast out, warnings that her presence would stain his name. Fear pressed against her ribs, whispering that she brought ruin with her. One afternoon she nearly packed her few belongings, ready to leave before the whispers hardened into stones. But as she reached for the door, she heard the children outside, calling her name in laughter, weaving her into their game. She stood frozen, torn between leaving and belonging. That evening, he found her sitting by the barn, her hands clenched tight. He did not ask what troubled her. He simply sat, the weight of his silence opening space for her to speak. At last she whispered, "They will never forgive me." Her voice broke like brittle wood. He turned, his gaze steady. "I am not asking them to. Forgiveness is not theirs to give. It is yours to claim." His words struck like a hammer, not cruel but undeniable. She felt them reverberate through her chest, unsettling and steadying all at once. The wind shifted that night, carrying with it the first scent of spring damp earth, wild grass, blossoms daring to rise. She lay awake beneath the quilt, listening to the soft breathing of children and the steady creak of the house, and realized something new had taken root. Her scars remained, but beneath them pulsed the stubborn promise of a life not yet finished. For the first time, she did not brace herself for exile. She let herself imagine a tomorrow where her hands shaped bread, where her voice told stories, where her heart stood unashamed beside his. Spring swelled across the land, painting the fields with wildflowers and carrying the smell of rain-soaked soil. Each morning she woke before the rooster, rising not from fear, but from purpose. The rhythm of work had become her own, fetching water, kneading dough, tending to the children with a hand steady enough that even the youngest now clung to her skirt without hesitation. Her scars no longer split open with each movement, though the ache lingered like a shadow. Yet that ache reminded her she was alive, still standing, still able to claim a place where once she had none. He watched her more often now, not with pity but with quiet respect. One afternoon, as they repaired the roof of the barn, he handed her a nail and paused before letting go. His fingers brushed hers, rough against rough, and in that small contact, something passed that words could not carry. The hammer in her hand shook, not from weakness, but from the sudden rush of feeling she had long buried. He turned away to set another beam, but she caught the faint curve of his mouth, a trace of warmth that steadied her as surely as his hand had once steadied her steps. The children saw it too, though they did not name it. They leaned into her more, offered her wildflowers for the table, argued over who would sit nearest to her at supper. She began to feel the fragile threads of belonging weave tighter around her, forming something stronger than she had ever thought possible. Still, doubt whispered at the edges. At the market in town, women stared, their eyes sharp as blades, their whispers cutting. One spat the word barren as if it were a curse. The old fear rose in her throat, burning. She almost fled back to the wagon, but then she felt a small hand slip into hers, the youngest child, fearless, tugging her forward. And there he was too, standing tall beside her, his voice calm but iron-bound as he greeted the merchants without shame. Their judgment slid off him like rain off rock, and in his steadiness she found her own. That night, after the children slept, she stood with him on the porch. The sky spread black above them, stars scattered like seeds. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. For a long time they said nothing, listening to the silence of the plains. Finally she spoke, her voice low. "I feared I would always be less, that no soil could hold me." Her hands trembled where they gripped the rail. He turned, his face lit faintly by the moon, and shook his head. "You've been soil all along," he said. "The world just tried to burn it barren. But look," he gestured to the fields, the flowers pushing through the earth, the grass rising fresh after storm. It grows again. So can you. Her throat closed, tears spilling before she could stop them. She bowed her head, ashamed of the sound breaking from her chest. But he reached and placed his hand lightly over hers, not gripping, not claiming, only steadying. The warmth of it settled deep, stronger than any vow she had ever heard spoken. For the first time she did not pull away. She let herself lean into it, into him, into the promise that even scars could hold the shape of new life. Inside, the children stirred in their sleep, the house breathing with the rhythm of safety. Outside, the plains stretched endless and harsh, yet no longer indifferent. Under the vast sky, she felt her heart root itself, fragile but real. The past still whispered, but the future answered louder, and for once she believed she could choose it.